The horizon bled crimson as the first light of dawn struck the jagged peaks of the northern frontier. Here, the world was a crucible, where empires rose and fell like tides, and the winds carried the scent of smoke and steel. In these borderlands, life was measured not by the passage of seasons, but by the clash of swords and the quiet thrum of distant drums. Villages huddled behind wooden palisades, their fires flickering against the creeping shadows of forests that whispered of old, forgotten wars. This was a land poised on the knife edge of history, where every step could be the first toward glory or oblivion. In the heart of this turbulent frontier, a young warrior named Kaelen stood at the precipice of manhood, his hands calloused, his heart tempered in 100 skirmishes he could barely remember. He had seen the banners of neighboring kingdoms flame against the sky, felt the jolt of arrows tearing through shields, and smelled the iron tang of blood mingling with rain-soaked earth. Yet nothing had hardened him for the arrival of the Black Legion, a merciless force that swept across the north like a living shadow. Their approach was not heralded by fanfare or trumpets, but by terror, the silent disappearance of villages, the hollow-eyed survivors who spoke in trembling whispers of fires that devoured both home and hope. Kaelen's village was next. They had heard the rumors carried on the wind like smoke over frozen fields, and now the time had come to stand or be crushed. The elders, voices trembling yet resolute, spoke of alliances with distant lords, of pacts sealed in ink and blood, yet Kaelen knew these were fragile shields against a tide of iron. At night, when the fires burned low, he walked among the villagers, feeling their fear as a weight on his chest. Mothers clutched children whose eyes mirrored their own panic, and the old men whispered prayers to gods they barely understood. In that darkness, Kaelen felt the invisible sword of destiny press upon him, a call to rise beyond the confines of his simple life. The first clash came before the sun had fully crowned the sky. Smoke and dust twisted in the cold morning air, as the Black Legion poured through the valley, a river of armored men and war beasts that seemed endless. Kaelen, standing atop a crumbling watchtower, gripped his father's sword, a relic of a bygone age. Its edge chipped, but its spirit unbroken. Every movement of the enemy was a calculated stroke of terror. Archers loosed flaming bolts. Cavalry thundered like storms across the plains, and the ground trembled beneath the march of steel-clad feet. In that moment, Kaelen understood what it meant to hold the line, to let courage shine when hope was almost extinct, and to face the abyss with nothing but resolve and the echo of generations before him. By nightfall, the village lay in ruin, yet from the ashes rose the first ember of rebellion. Survivors, weary and bloodied, gathered around Kaelen, whose presence became both shield and symbol. They did not yet know if their courage would carry them through the long winter ahead, or if they would become another forgotten footnote in the annals of empire. But in their eyes, he saw reflected the unyielding spark that defied conquest. A quiet defiance that whispered of stories yet untold, of legends that would not die even when empires crumbled. On the edge of empire, amidst fire and blood, the stage was set for a journey where the sword would meet the crossroad, and where every choice carved the fate of men and nations alike. The wind carried the scent of incense and iron as Kaelen rode toward the nearest stronghold, a fortress perched on the cliffs above a churning river. It was a place where faith and steel intertwined, where banners bearing crosses fluttered beside the gleam of polished armor, and where the voices of bishops and knights could shape the fate of kingdoms. Here, religion was not a whisper in the wind. It was a weapon, as sharp as any sword, capable of cutting through both flesh and conscience. Kaelen, still stained with the blood of his village, felt the weight of this world pressing upon him. A realm where the pious and the powerful played a game of dominance, and where the line between salvation and subjugation blurred with every prayer. The bishop of the fortress was a man both revered and feared, a scholar of scripture whose gaze could unsettle even the most hardened warriors. He spoke of divine purpose, of holy wars fought in the name of God, and of the sacred duty to protect the faithful. Yet beneath his words lurked ambition, a hunger for power that masked itself in virtue. Kaelen observed the flicker of doubt in his eyes, the subtle tightening of his jaw when the tales of distant lands and mercenary armies were recounted. It was a delicate dance of influence. The sword acknowledged the cross, and the cross guided the sword, but neither could fully control the other. The young warrior realized that survival here meant learning the rhythm of both, to wield courage and conviction as one might wield a blade. Alliances were forged in whispers and shadows, far from the sunlit courts where lords and clerics paraded their grandeur. Kaelen found himself negotiating with men whose hands were steady on hilts and whose minds were sharper still. Men who understood that faith could be a bond stronger than gold, yet a leash tighter than iron. These were not men of mere devotion, they were strategists, tacticians who measured morality as one measures armor thickness, a variable in a battle whose outcome was never certain. Amid the flickering torchlight of council halls, Kaelen discovered a truth that would haunt him for years. The line between heroism and tyranny was a narrow ridge, often traversed with the same steps, and it was the intent behind the act that would define history. Beyond the walls, the lands were restless. Peasants whispered of miracles and curses alike, of saints who walked the valleys and demons who prowled the hills. Rumors of distant invasions reached the fortress like echoes from a far-off world, and Kaelen saw in them the threads of a tapestry weaving itself across the continent. Every blade carried a story, every prayer a hidden agenda. And in this landscape of shifting loyalties, he realized that the sword and the cross were not merely instruments of power. They were mirrors, reflecting the fear, faith, and ambition of every man who dared to wield them. Each night, as the wind rattled the ramparts and the river roared below, Kaelen's thoughts turned inward. Could a man truly fight for God and justice alike? Or must one always bend before the other? As winter deepened, the fortress became a crucible. Skirmishes erupted along the outer walls, testing both the mettle of soldiers and the convictions of preachers. Kaelen rode into battle with a strange duality. The steel in his hand met the shadow of a cross upon his chest, and each strike was both a defense of life and a testament to something larger than himself. In these moments, he understood the paradox that would shape his destiny. The sword demanded action, decisive and unflinching. The cross demanded restraint, reflection, and sometimes sacrifice. In the quiet aftermath of each fight, as fires died to embers and the wounded were tended, Kaelen began to glimpse the larger truth that the clash of steel and faith was not merely external, but within the heart of every man who dared to stand at history's crossroads. The roads converged at a town cradled between mountains and rivers, a place where the echoes of countless footsteps, merchants, soldiers, and pilgrims wove a tapestry of destiny. Here, the fates of kingdoms intersected like the crossing of two rivers, each carrying both promise and peril. Kaelen arrived with a small company, the remnants of his village's defenders, their armor dented, their spirits weary but unbroken. The town was alive with tension. Spies moved like shadows through narrow alleys, and the whispers of intrigue clung to the marketplace as stubbornly as the winter chill. Every glance held a secret, every handshake a potential betrayal. It was a moment where the future could be rewritten with the flick of a dagger or the stroke of a quill. At the heart of the town stood the Crossroads Inn, an unassuming place that concealed within its walls the ambitions of lords, merchants, and priests alike. It was here that Kaelen first met Seraphin, a bishop whose reputation as a mediator and schemer preceded him. Seraphin's presence was magnetic, yet unsettling, as if he could see through the facades of men and discern their true natures. He spoke of alliances and threats, of armies gathering beyond the horizon, and of opportunities that could turn the tide of history. Kaelen sensed that each word was calculated, a thread carefully woven to entangle both loyalty and conscience. In this hall, destiny itself seemed to pause, waiting to see which of the men, or perhaps which of the ideals, would claim its favor. The town's streets became a stage for silent wars. Merchants carried intelligence disguised as merchandise, and wandering knights measured strength not in duels, but in observation and subtle intimidation. Kaelen moved among them, a young warrior learning the cruel calculus of strategy. Courage alone would not win battles here, nor could faith shield him from deception. Each encounter tested him, forcing him to weigh the value of honor against the necessity of survival. He discovered that choices made in the blink of an eye could ripple through months, years, even generations, shaping events far beyond his comprehension. The crossroads were not merely geographic, they were moral, spiritual, and existential, a place where the fate of men, kingdoms, and beliefs collided in ways both visible and unseen. In the shadow of the town's cathedral, a secret council gathered, comprising knights, emissaries, and clergy who wielded influence like blades. Kaelen was drawn into the meeting, a witness and participant, and he realized that the grand narratives of history were composed not in open battlefields but in quiet rooms, behind locked doors. Arguments of faith and politics intertwined, each statement a gambit, each pause a calculated risk. He felt the tension of decisions that could unleash wars or forge fragile peace. And as he listened, Kaelen saw that fate was not a river flowing aimlessly. It was a mirror of human ambition, courage, fear, and folly, reflecting the choices of those bold enough or desperate enough to shape it. Night fell with a deceptive calm. Lanterns glowed along the streets, casting long, wavering shadows that seemed to stretch into infinity. Kaelen walked alone atop the stone bridge that spanned the river, contemplating the paths that lay ahead. Behind him, the town slept uneasily. Before him, the horizon hinted at war, conquest, and the uncertain turn of fortune. In that moment, he understood that the crossroads demanded more than sword or faith. It demanded clarity of purpose, the courage to act in a world where certainty was a luxury, and the willingness to bear the weight of consequences unseen. Here, at the meeting point of destiny, Kaelen's journey was no longer merely survival. It was the shaping of history itself, a delicate balance between ambition, honor, and the inexorable march of fate. The horizon glowed with fire long before the first screams pierced the night. Smoke twisted into the clouds, black and suffocating, as the enemy descended upon the town like a tide of shadows. Kaelen, standing atop the ramparts with the surviving knights and villagers, felt the weight of inevitability pressing down on him. Every arrow that struck the wall, every bellow of the siege engines, was a reminder that courage alone could not repel a relentless tide. The town had become a crucible, where fear and bravery were indistinguishable, and where the cost of a single mistake was measured in lives, blood, and the fragile threads of hope. The siege stretched into days, each hour a test of endurance and will. Kaelen moved among the defenders, his sword slicing through the chaos, while his mind traced strategies that could outwit the besiegers. Fires devoured wooden structures, smoke choked the streets, and yet in the heart of the darkness, quiet acts of heroism shone with impossible brilliance. Mothers hid children beneath rubble. Old men hurled stones with surprising accuracy. Young soldiers fought with the desperate resolve of those who know that surrender is a luxury they cannot afford. Every life saved, every blade lifted, became a stanza in a grim, unyielding poem written in blood and ash. Amid the carnage, betrayal struck as sharply as any sword. A contingent of knights, swayed by promises of wealth and titles, opened the gates under the cover of night. Chaos erupted, the defenders caught between the fury of the invaders and the shock of treachery. Kaelen found himself facing men who had once stood as allies, their eyes cold, distant, as though the flame of loyalty had been extinguished in a single heartbeat. It was in these moments he realized that the truth of war revealed itself. Victory was never simply a product of courage, and honor was a fragile, often futile shield against the hunger for power. The walls that had promised safety crumbled, leaving only the raw truth of survival. Through the smoke and ruin, the Bishop Seraphim appeared, his robes torn, his eyes alight with a strange fire. He had walked the line between the divine and the political with calculated grace, and now he walked into the heart of the storm, urging both defenders and civilians to hold, to believe, to endure. He spoke not of victory nor of glory, but of the legacy that courage and faith could leave behind, even when the world seemed poised to crumble. Kaelen, listening to the bishop's words amid the roar of battle, felt the weight of something larger than himself, the realization that war was never merely about land or power, but about the stories etched into the hearts of those who survived, the tales that would outlive the smoke and the bodies. As the siege reached its apex, the town teetered on the brink of annihilation. Every street had become a theater of death, every corner a testament to both fear and resilience. And yet, from the shadows, the defenders struck with a desperate brilliance, reclaiming walls, saving the wounded, and turning the tide in small, miraculous increments. By dawn, the fires had dimmed, and the enemy, battered and weary, withdrew beyond the hills. The town was scarred, its stones blackened and shattered, but it still stood. Kaelen, surveying the ruin and the exhausted faces around him, understood that the true victory was neither total nor absolute. It was the endurance of spirit, the unbroken will of those who refused to bow, and the haunting knowledge that history had been carved again in fire, steel, and the quiet, resolute heartbeat of survival. The town lay in ruin, yet amid the blackened walls and smoldering streets, life persisted. Survivors emerged from hiding, faces streaked with soot and tears, carrying the weight of both grief and relief. Kaelen walked among them, his hands blistered, his armor dented, yet his gaze held a quiet, unshakable resolve. The siege had stripped away illusions, revealing the raw skeleton of human courage and frailty. Every stone in the rubble whispered of sacrifice. Every scarred face carried a story of endurance. In the wake of destruction, Kaelen understood that history was not built in triumph alone, but in the measured persistence of those who refused to surrender, who bore the weight of the past while forging a path forward. The Bishop Seraphin, once a figure of calculated influence, now appeared humbled, his robes torn and dirtied by the smoke and battle. He walked among the survivors, offering prayers, consolations, and guidance, yet he too bore the knowledge of the human cost of ambition. Kaelen observed how faith, often wielded as a weapon, had become a lifeline, binding the fractured souls of the town together. In the intersection of steel and cross, of blood and devotion, a fragile order emerged, a lesson that power and piety were most potent not when imposed, but when shared, tempered by mercy and tempered by sacrifice. History, Kaelen realized, was written not only in the deeds of kings or clerics, but in the quiet endurance of those who survived to tell its tale. Rebuilding began immediately, a labor both practical and symbolic. Streets were cleared of debris, walls were reinforced, and the wounded were tended with tireless hands. Kaelen worked alongside men and women, soldiers and civilians, all united by a shared determination to rise from the ashes. In these acts of restoration, he found a different kind of heroism, one less celebrated yet no less profound: the courage to care, to rebuild, to confront the fragility of life with stubborn resolve. And as he labored, Kaelen saw in every repaired wall and replanted field a testament to the enduring power of human will, an assertion that even in a world ravaged by war, the spirit of survival and the spark of hope remains unextinguished. Letters and emissaries carried news of the siege far beyond the mountains, tales of valor and cunning that rippled through courts, monasteries, and villages alike. Kaelen became a figure of legend, though he bore the weight of these stories with quiet solemnity, knowing that heroism was never a simple tale. Every triumph had its shadow, every victory its hidden cost. Yet in these echoes of fame and remembrance, he discerned a deeper truth. The legacy of a man, a people, or even an entire kingdom is measured not only by the battles fought or the lands claimed, but by the moral courage and faith that endure long after the swords are sheathed and the fires have died. The past, he realized, lives not in monuments or chronicles alone, but in the lives that continue in its wake. And so Kaelen stood at the edge of the rebuilt town, watching the sun rise over a horizon scarred yet unbroken. The sword that had defended the innocent and challenged tyrants rested at his side. The cross, a symbol of guidance, hung upon his chest. He understood at last that history was not merely the record of events, but the living pulse of choices, sacrifices, and faith intertwined. Because the past is never truly gone, it's waiting to be reborn. In every stone, every story, every life touched by courage and conviction, the echoes of sword and cross endure, whispering to those willing to listen, ready to rise once more.